The boy's wrist twisted in the grip of a stranger's hand, the plastic zip tie cutting into his skin as he stumbled on the curb. His backpack slipped off his shoulder and spilled open, notebooks scattering like wounded birds across the pavement. He tried to speak, to protest, but the man shoving him forward snarled with the cold certainty of borrowed authority. Two others flanked them, their shirts emblazoned with bold white letters that read security, though their bearing was far too aggressive to be anything close to protective. "Keep walking," one of them barked, shoving him toward an unmarked SUV idling at the curb. It was not even sundown yet. Porch lights blinked to life in the suburban cul-de-sac. Sprinklers hissed in neat arcs across manicured lawns, and neighbors peeked from behind blinds. Yet not a single door opened. The quiet horror of the moment wrapped itself around the boy's chest like a tightening noose. He had only been walking home from practice, a 15-minute stretch of sidewalk between the park and his mother's driveway, a route he had taken hundreds of times without incident. Now, strangers, dressed like enforcers of some hollow law, dragged him as though he were prey. The boy's eyes darted, desperate for someone, anyone to intervene, but the neighborhood silence was heavier than the hands on him. He tried again. "I live right here. I'm not." But his voice cracked beneath the weight of disbelief. "Quiet," one of the men growled, pressing him harder toward the SUV. In those seconds, everything he had been taught about safety, about justice, about calling out wrong, shattered like glass. His sneakers scraped the pavement as he was shoved into the back seat, the door slamming shut behind him. The men wore the arrogance of people who had played this game before, people who had convinced themselves that intimidation was order, that fear was respect. They called themselves the HOA compliance officers, though no homeowner had ever voted them into existence. They were self-appointed guardians of rules no one remembered agreeing to. But to a 15-year-old boy with wrists bound and lungs tight, they looked and felt like cops. What they did not know was whose son he was. At that same moment, 2 miles away, his mother sat in her office, the glow of the desk lamp softening the harshness of case files stacked high. She was the district attorney, an iron-willed protector, forged in years of battles inside and outside the courtroom. Her colleagues often said she carried both the sharpness of a blade and the compassion of a healer, and though the weight of her cases was heavy, she bore it without complaint. For justice was not her job, it was her vow. Her phone buzzed, not with the familiar ringtone of her son's calls, but with a panicked voice from a neighbor. The words tumbled, fractured and gasping. "They took him, your boy. Some men, they put him in a truck. He didn't do anything. Please hurry." Time stopped. Her heartbeat hammered not in her chest but in her ears, flooding her with a clarity that only comes in moments of primal threat. She grabbed her keys, not her purse, and within seconds the engine of her car roared against the night. The air smelled of asphalt and cut grass as she tore through familiar streets now thick with shadows and dread. For her, the road to her son was not merely asphalt but a battlefield. Memories surged as she drove. The soldiers she had once prosecuted for betraying their oath, the broken families she had consoled in courthouse hallways, the injustice she had sworn she would never allow to stand unanswered. And now, the fight had breached her very home. When she arrived, the scene before her froze into a single tableau of outrage. 3 grown men standing around an SUV, one of them leaning casually against the hood as if guarding a prize. Inside the vehicle, her son's face pressed against the window, pale and streaked with tears. She did not hesitate. Her steps were measured, her voice calm, but her presence was thunder wrapped in silence. The men turned, expecting perhaps another frightened parent, someone they could bully into submission. Instead, they found eyes sharper than their lies, a woman whose authority did not need a uniform. "What is the charge?" she asked, her words low but carrying the weight of centuries of law behind them. The leader smirked. "Violation of community safety. Loitering where he doesn't belong." The absurdity hung in the air, a flimsy curtain too weak to hide the naked aggression beneath. She let the silence stretch, her gaze locked on them, unflinching. And in that silence, the men began to feel it. that unspoken shift when false power crumbles before true authority. "You will release him," she said, each word deliberate, carved from stone. They laughed, a brittle, defensive sound. One gesture toward her son. "We're keeping him here until the HOA decides what to do." The title of district attorney was not something she needed to announce. It was not a badge she needed to flash. It lived in the steadiness of her posture, the certainty in her tone, the history of verdicts that had reshaped lives and communities. "You've just committed kidnapping," she said quietly. "You have assaulted a minor, impersonated law enforcement, and unlawfully detained him without cause. If you do not release him this second, your next destination will not be this neighborhood. It will be prison." For the first time, their bravado cracked. The silence from the surrounding houses deepened, as blinds that had been half closed shifted open. Neighbors, drawn by the unfolding storm, began to bear witness. The boy watched, his breath catching, as his mother stood unarmed yet unshakable before men who had bound his wrists. In her stillness, there was a force more powerful than shouting, more devastating than rage. The leader of the group opened his mouth, but no words came. Something in her eyes stripped him of the illusions he had built, leaving only the raw truth. He was a man playing cop in a borrowed uniform of fear. Slowly, grudgingly, he opened the SUV door. The boy stumbled out, his wrists still bound, but his spirit ignited by the sight of his mother's unwavering presence. She moved to him, her fingers deftly removing the ties, her touch both tender and fierce. The crowd that had gathered was silent, but not out of fear, out of respect. They saw not only a mother reclaiming her son, but a defender dismantling tyranny in their own cul-de-sac. When the boy was free, she turned back to the men. "You will follow me to the station," she said, "or I will have officers here in minutes and you will leave in handcuffs. Those are your only options." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then, like a house of cards collapsing under its own arrogance, the men nodded. Their eyes no longer carried fire, only the dull resignation of those who have been exposed. Later, when official police cruisers pulled into the neighborhood, it was not her raised voice or brandished badge that told the story. It was the silent rows of neighbors watching from porches and windows, bearing witness to the night when false authority was broken by a mother's unshakable will. Her son, still trembling, whispered as she guided him home, "I thought no one would stop them." She rested a hand on his shoulder, steady and warm. "Sometimes the strongest voice," she said, "is silence that refuses to yield." That night, as charges were filed and the impostors sat in holding cells, the neighborhood's quiet shifted. No longer the silence of complicity, but of reverence, of an unspoken understanding that true authority is not claimed with loudness, but proven with justice. The boy would remember it for the rest of his life. The zip ties, the fear, the SUV.